Hello guys, we are back now with Aftershow.
Yep, should be good.
So with me I have Billy,
Hey.
and Billy is a dude in the Rats and Bellies Guild, I think.
Yep, that's correct.
And he usually does some Brag and Brawl casting together with Car Ninja, and generally tournament streaming casting stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe what I do. I pretty much just I host a few tournaments, I cast a few tournaments, I run a few tournaments, I do a bit of everything in some tournaments. Basically, my focus has always been, probably always will be, on the competitive scene of Scrolls. Everything except playing in the competitive scene of Scrolls because I'm not that good, but you know.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're good or not. You can still have a good eye for the competitive stuff.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I was not blessed with it. No, I do hope that I can bring something different to the competitive scene of Scrolls and give a different outlook to some of the other casters. Um, that do a lot of casting. There are quite a few that do really good job. And Cardinal, you mentioned earlier, who I work with quite a lot.
Yeah, but
But there's a few
now,
others as well.
now you get a chance to take a look at some of the old scrolls that you designed over a year ago.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a story to tell with these. To give you a time frame of when these were envisioned, if that's the word you want to use, this was before Decay was released. This was the first design competition, and all we knew about Decay was like not even the theming of Decay, but like the mechanical theming of Decay, right? So the idea of losing units but gaining a benefit, life after death, that kind of stuff, right? That's all we knew about. Um,
Yeah, you can kind of
and
see that in this.
yeah, so I should also point out something else. This was before I did any casting. I was in any of the like I wasn't in the competitive scene. No one knew my name. I was just a guy that played Scrolls versus the AI and hanged out with Asajib. That was like all I did. So these scrolls are really bad. They're bad for a lot of different ways. There's one which is ridiculously OP. But in my head, when I look back at these and I saw these, I'm like, there's design ideas in here, and there are certain things that either made it into the game or have the idea is still good. You know what I mean? Like you can still take from the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. It's just, yeah, like these just read, they just feel wrong to me. Like just reading
Yeah,
this first one, uh,
these are all
it's
of
it's
the.
so
This is
wonky.
all of these are bad, and I don't pretend that they're good or that they're ever going to make it into the game. There was a reason I never entered that competition because I realized at some point that these were very very bad. But I think it's funny. I think it's a fun thing to look back at some of the ideas and look back at like poison. We didn't even know. We just look at this one here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You're basically describing poison as it is. Deal one damage for, one X rounds. So you're
Yeah.
treating it as poison where you're being dealt one damage, but the round number is variable. And that used to be the case
Yes.
with poison.
Yes. And this was before we knew what poison was, and we didn't really know what it was. This was just my interpretation of hearing, that there was going to be a poison, there was going to be poisonous stuff as a mechanic, and this was my interpretation of it. Um, I think poison is much better now than it is in this description that I've used here. This is kind of similar to what it used to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just used to be for 3 rounds. So
Yeah.
essentially, they were probably playing around with the idea of having poison for X rounds, but they changed that.
Hmm. Yep. Something else you'll notice here is that the fight to the end. So this was before we had the like the button at the bottom, something that we all take for granted now, right? But the button at the bottom that you could use that showed that this had like a triggerable effect, right? You see this on Night Scholar, you see this
Yeah,
on Earthborn Mystic. So everything is described in the text in the actual like the just the bulk of the text, right? So fight to the end is the name of the ability. That will be a button now, but back then we didn't have a button. It would just be in the text. So
right.
it's kind of an interesting thing when you look back at this because this was made in the style of what it used to be. I mean, we didn't have keywords back then. So where it says like deal one poison damage for a number of rounds, that was how it was described for some cards. For some
It's
cards it would
amazing.
just tell you what it was, and that's it's what I find interesting about these is that you look back at these and you can see like almost old design decisions, and what would have been acceptable back then, and how it's just crazy to think about this now. But
I
I guess
mean,
we should talk about that.
yes, I mean, this thing, you're essentially treating it as an order scroll. So, I mean, it makes sense because you didn't know, kinda, the Mire versus the Kinfolk versus
Yep.
Dura, the Jedi, whatever it is. And it's interesting that back then it seems to only have been two factions, I think, Growth and Order initially in the alpha,
Yeah,
and
in
then
Alpha.
gradually the developers added on to Energy and then Decay finally.
Yep. And you'll see that. I mean, this has no ties to what we like aesthetically what we associate with Decay. I mean, my envision was that even though it was Decay, in my head, it was like they're going to be humans. They're just going to be evil humans, right? And they're going to be bad people, right? And that's just how I saw it then. So I made up the fictitious empire and stuff like that, and like these bad guys, very stereotypical bad guys, and that was just how I saw that then. It's kind of again interesting to see it now compared to what I thought it might be like.
Yeah, all right. Well, if you have anything else to add to this one, Emperor's Guard, because it seems very understated, like that pops out immediately. We could move on to
Yeah,
the next one.
extremely weak.
Okay, there we go. So I put up Master Tactician on the screen, and that is a 5 decay, 1 attack, 3 countdown, 5 health creature, human, empire. And it says here in the text, I'm just going to straight up read this.
Sure.
Irredeemable action. When countdown is 0, you may cover a row on you and your opponent's side with Poison Mist, dealing 1 damage each round for 3 rounds.
Okay, so first off, the stats on this are rubbish, right? That's the first thing that jumps
Yeah,
out to me when I look at this.
you overvalued, I think, Poison.
Horrible, horrible stats. Um, yeah, it costs too much. The countdown is too high. Doesn't have enough attack. The health is probably the only thing which is probably okay. Is the fact that it has 5 health.
Yeah, I mean, even back then, I think you had burn from the very early stages of the game. So
Uh-huh.
people understood that you need to be over 3 health, essentially.
Yep.
But I mean, it is interesting, the basic idea of having something that does AoE poison damage, and that is essentially what what's it called? Infected, the Blight Bearer. Is that
Yeah.
his name?
Like
Yeah.
this is the funny thing when I look at this is that I see this and I go, this is similar in mechanic to Blightbearer, right? It does it's a similar thing. It dies and it leaves a poison behind. I mean, it's different to how I described it here, but it's a similar concept here. And again, this is before we knew what it was. So it's kind of interesting that you see that this almost made it into the game, at least in part, in mechanic, but with a way better scroll, like
Yeah.
so much better. This is just so underpowered. It's completely useless. It would never get played. I think a way to improve it and to make it better. Well, for starters, you could reduce the cost of it, right? Bring it down to 4.
Yeah.
That's a choice. You could reduce the cooldown as well, down to 2. I imagine you would also have to bump the attack up by 1, so something along the lines of a 225 for 4 with this effect. That might be too strong. You might want to take parts of that.
Yeah, it'd feel like a stronger the Blightbearer at that point, because the
Yeah,
Blightbearer's poison arrow effect is so potent, and being able to just
exactly.
do that without dying feels like it would be too powerful. Like maybe you'd even have
Yeah,
to cost this at 6 or something, make it a slightly more expensive unit. But I think the idea,
but
AoE poison damage without it dying, is a good idea.
yes, and again, it's just an interesting thing to see that this kind of made it into the game. So I mean, there's not really much else to add on these. These are going to be fairly short, as you would
Yeah,
imagine. There are
so
not too many of these.
we're gonna move on to the next one, which is Emperor's Daughter, 3 decay, spell. All damage from you and your opponent is reduced. Okay, so from your units and your opponent unit's
Yes,
attack is reduced to 0 for 1 round.
wording is an issue in these as well. Um, okay, this one's the most blatant one. This is rain delay. If you've
Yeah,
ever played, I believe Shadow Era. This is rain delay. That's literally what this is. I didn't realize it at the time, but I certainly realized it when I was looking back at it. Um,
and now
it's
it's sickening fumes.
and now it's sickening fumes. Exactly. This is another thing. This is sickening fumes essentially. It's a weaker version of sickening fumes, but I mean the rarity is the same. The effect is very very similar. Um, again, it's mostly the theming that is very, very different. Again, I stuck with this empire notion and this idea.
I
But
also
that never
like that
was
you're
really it.
using the term one round, and that is something that I think the developers should use a bit more. It's only used in the game currently on the potion resistance. It specifies this is in play for 3 rounds. But for anything that lasts 1 round, they say until the end of your opponent's turn. And I
Ooh,
think
yeah.
1 round sounds a lot cleaner.
Yeah, I would agree with that actually. I did not know that in fact. But yeah, no, I would definitely I would have like rounds to me because then it boils it down to a very simple term, right?
Yeah, I mean
It's a
your
round. If you
turn and
know
then your opponent's turn.
if you know what a round is, if you know what it is, then you can apply that to 1 round, 2 round, 3 round, up to infinity, right? You just have to know what that basically is. If you say up until the end of your opponent's next turn, it that can leave some confusion, I feel, for some players.
It's even more confusing.
That's an interesting point.
It's even weirder when you think about the lingering spells. They specify turns in the linger value highlight text, but it's actually
Mm,
rounds that they mean, which is,
yes,
it's
that
just weird. It
is
feels like they would specify rounds in the linger value, but I don't know. Like
interesting. I did not.
they
Yeah,
could
I did not
clean
think about
things
that.
up a little bit. But I mean,
Totally. Well, I'll
it's a
tell you,
cool idea. This is a cool idea, and it made it into the
it
game.
it made it into the game in some form. Yeah.
So next up is reinforcements. 2 decay. Place 1 peasant warrior next to a friendly
Okay.
target unit.
This definitely needs explaining because there is no peasant warrior. I
Okay, I was
stopped
looking for one. So,
before I made it. I stopped before I made it, but I do know what it was. I had it written down in a
all
notepad,
right, go
and
ahead.
I went and found a notepad, and I knew what it was. It was going to be a 1-2-1, which is horrible, but you got to think about
Yeah.
what was going to be what was in my head, the vision, and the idea of stuff like peasant warrior was going to be fitting with the mechanical theme, sacrificing and just throwing them out. So in my head it was just throw them out. Who cares if they die, because that's the whole point and the theme of the faction, right, is that units dying and gaining benefit. So there were going to be scrolls which were going to entail having benefits from just losing peasant warriors, right? And we kind of see this in some form, in the sense of the witch doctor bringing back people as zombies, right, bringing them back as husks, etc. um but this is
I mean,
far weaker than that.
it's basically like a ripper. It's a really cheap creature that you can often use for sacrifice fodder in a necrogeddon or in front of the witch doctor. But it's
Yes,
just really
yes,
badly valued.
yes. Again, a common trend, badly valued. This should be summoned 2. If it was going to be 2 costs, it should probably summon 2 instead of 1, especially because
Yeah,
the creatures are so weak. Or it could even go down to 1 and summon 2 of them because they are so weak.
exactly.
They are so just puny that they were designed just to die. I could see that doing down. But I mean, again, we saw that this is before Rat King was even in, and we see similar things with Rat King. So it's another
I mean,
interesting
yeah.
point.
I mean, initially, Rat King, it is pretty crazy value when you think about it, because the Beast Rat, it used to be, okay, it used to be a 1/1, I think. So a 1/1 for 1, and the
Yeah,
Rat King costs 4 and summons 3 1/1s. So this reinforcement spell isn't that different, really. You're paying 2 less for 2
yep,
2 fewer creatures that are 1/1s. But I mean, maybe you're thinking maybe there are spell duplication in Decay, because then it might make more sense that you play a
yeah.
reinforcement thing and then that spell is duplicated. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things. Again, a lot of this is never got finished, never got done. I never submitted these and stuff. But,
It's
um,
interesting though. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one,
yeah.
which is the High Priest, and it's a human empire again. 4 Decay. Did you use any other subtypes than human empire?
Nope, I stuck with
Oh,
that
okay.
because that was the whole point. That was the whole point of this entire thing.
Well, were there any different subtypes back then? I know there wasn't in order, but I guess growth still had kinfolk and beast. Or
Yeah,
did they?
Kinfolk and Beast, but apart from that, it was just. I mean, like we didn't get soldiers, did we? Well, we had soldiers and we had knights, but that was it.
Okay, well then it makes more sense, I think.
Yeah.
But go ahead with this one. So this is a 1 attack, 2 countdown, 3 health unit. When countdown is 0, you may inflict poison 3 to enemy creature. Okay. It's basically like the new, what's it called? Miasma Well, which is about to pop out on live with the February balance
Yep.
proposal patch.
Yep, it's quite similar to that. I mean, I like the idea, right? It's something that can sit back and poison
Yeah.
units. We have similar things to this, but they do immediate damage. We have the there's the energy scroll. I can't remember. Marksman, was it? Hive
Yeah,
Marksman?
Hide Marksman.
Which is a similar concept, deal damage from a safe distance. And we also have obviously there are a few creatures that have effects similar to this. The biggest issue with this one that I see, one is the fact that at 2 it could be really difficult to deal with, right? If you could bulk up a big defense, then you could sit back with this thing and just like spam that poison out, and it would just do so much damage to people.
Yeah.
Especially if it was taking into account poison as it is now, opposed to how I have it written. The other big issue, and the one that's most obvious, is at 4 cost. I feel like it's too expensive.
I mean, at
maybe-
2, it's essentially a Ranger's Bane with a body, reusable. I think
So-
actually it should be fine at 3 decay, if it
Yeah.
was like that.
3 would probably be more acceptable.
We're gonna go ahead and move on to another one. And that is the top dog. No, I thought it was a creature, but it's a spell. So Greedy Emperor, 8 decay spell. Draw 1 more card each round. Oh, okay.
This is OP. This is the OP one.
However, your idols will take 1 damage each round you don't play more than 1 creature card. Okay, yeah, this is incredibly OP.
Ridiculously OP. I can't believe I thought
Like, this
would
is
be a balanced
broken.
thing.
Was this
Oh.
around? Was it Imperial Resources around back then?
Yes. it
Okay,
was.
so this is
It
the decay version of the Imperial Resources.
You're catching on. This was definitely it. Now, something really funny you might notice if you have a good eye is that the top half of the card does not match the bottom half of the card. It's slightly misaligned. Some of the pixels are not correct. The reason for that is that this went through like 3 or 4 different changes because it used to just draw 1 extra card with no downside. Seriously,
Oh, wow.
no downside, and I thought that was okay. So the reason the pixels are slightly misaligned is because I actually photoshopped in the bottom half of the card with different text twice. Twice I did this to try and get it balanced, and I still wasn't able to do it. I think the cost as well went up, so the top is also different to the. And it's just because I couldn't find the art, right? I couldn't find another copy of that art, and I lost
Alright,
it.
how did you actually make cards back then? Did you have a scroll designer?
I think there was a scrolls designer. I might have just done this all in GIMP and Photoshop. I'm not sure. I honestly can't tell you. I'm gonna say that there was scrolls designer back then, so I think there probably was. It wasn't as good as it is now.
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
for sure.
I used it in the first contest, and back then it didn't have the ability. You didn't have the ability buttons on the scroll designer, so I photoshopped in an ability button for one of my entries, just because I figured it was one of the structure things. So it was for the second design contest.
Yeah.
So it must have been
Yeah,
even harder back then.
Yeah, I should have done that, but like you said, that's difficult. I mean, there's nothing more to say than this is OP. This is ridiculously OP.
Yes, it definitely is.
There's no way around it. I mean, I think you could maybe increase like you would have to play more than 1 creature. Maybe 2 creatures per would be better, but then it would still be ridiculously OP. I feel because you could just chain these things, and then when you also on top of this, when you think about some of the creatures that I was including, especially like the peasant warriors and stuff, and
Yeah, they were cheap.
Throw these out, it would be super cheap to do and super easy to do. Something else that Meister pointed out to me, he pointed out 2 things to me. One, it stacks, right? It stacks with itself.
Oh wow, it's basically like a lingering spell.
Before we had lingering. And this, the other thing that Meister pointed out to me is that you play this unless you have more than 8 resources. If you only have 8 resources, right, and you play this card, you are going to take 1 idle damage because you won't have enough resources to play any creatures on the turn you play it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
there's no
guaranteed
drawback
to take
actually. I
damage,
mean, it's the thing is, I think this is a really cool idea. I think you could turn this into an actual scroll, 4 decay even. And the way I would do it is have it maybe at 8 decay, sure. Have it just non-conditionally draw you 1 card every round, but put like a timer on it, so it will deal 1 magic damage to all of your idols every turn. So it might have to.
Mm.
It would basically be you will lose in 10 rounds, or like however much health your idols have. But at the same time, you get a bunch of effects. So it'd be kind of like the
Yeah.
King's Peace, but on a board-wide level.
It's funny that King's Peace is such a talking point right now because I feel like this is on par with King's Peace. Maybe not quite as ridiculous as this is. I mean, this is just insane, but it's a similar kind of like crazy, like, oh my, this is like, if this entered the game, especially in this condition, it would just destroy the game, right? The
It
game
would.
will be turned on its head. And I feel sorry, King's Peace, not Knight's Peace. King's Peace will do a similar thing, at least for a week or two. If it goes in its current state, will really, really change up the way the game's going to be played and really mix it up.
I mean, that's what I like it. A lot of people are critical, but I think because it's so radical, actually offering an alternative loss condition,
Mm-hmm.
that's what excites me about it. I mean,
That
sure,
that does also excite me a
it's
lot.
going to be really wonky because you have ward in the game, so that means you
Yeah.
can negate the drawback. But if they figure out a way to, circumvent that, it should be really fun.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that. If Ward wasn't a thing, which Ward has to be a thing. This is the problem with scrolls. Is like the way enchantments work and the way the game works is like it's very difficult to make enchantments
Yeah,
very strong. But at the moment with Ward and the way it is right now, Ward is crazy good. Like Ward is amazing. I don't know if the solution is not allow Ward to be placed. Maybe it will be Ward only is like a really rare thing, right? So it's like Wings Warder is probably my favorite example of Ward, right?
yeah.
It gives
I
Ward to
mean,
everything on the board, but she is not. She could be targeted by stuff. I think that's a great design decision.
yeah,
I think
I
when they
I
made that
love
change,
the
it's
way
different.
she works, but also I loved her initially when her ward was only active while she was at one countdown or
Yes,
less,
yes,
because then you could increase her countdown in addition to
as a
moving her away
counter.
from the row, and in that
Hmm.
way negate the ward. And I love that design. It's a shame that they now made the countdown irrelevant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but that it's interesting because that's two ways. That's two separate ways with one creature because they made the change. That's two ways to make Ward interesting and balanced, in
Yeah,
my opinion. And both of them worked. Both of them were good ways. We saw people running countdown increase to counter Wings Warder. Now the
it was
current,
pretty fun.
yeah, and it was different. It made the meta shifted. And that's something that's interesting. So.
I mean, what you could do is you could add to the ward trait itself. If this unit's countdown is higher than its base countdown, ward is no longer active.
That would be a very interesting way to change Ward, yeah. But it's not even that idea. It's the idea of just adding counterplay, right?
Yeah,
It's having
exactly.
some capability to play around Ward and to break Ward down beyond just hitting your head against the wall and trying to kill the creature.
I think that the problem with Scrolls is that it's still a very young game.
Hmm.
So you have these concepts that have taken several years, almost decades, in other TCGs like MTG, and they've been able to refine counters and counters to those counters and so on over thousands of cards until they
Yeah.
find this, really interesting balance where you can put hexproof on something, but you can also play this thing that destroys all creatures regardless of whether or not they have hexproof. You have these
Hmm.
interrupts and all that things. And you don't have that in Scrolls yet because we have such a small card base. We only have 360 Scrolls. There isn't room in every set to add a counter to every new thing you
Hmm.
introduce.
Hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
really the limiting thing. If they now in the next set introduces ward counters, and that could be done through more Slayer type effects, it could be done with spells that don't require you to target a unit, you
Yeah.
know,
AoE.
things like that, AoE, a random opponent creature, things like that,
Hmm.
and then ward would suddenly be fine again.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there. I was talking to Blinky about this when we finished BraggingBrawl. We were chatting before I came on here, and we were talking about Magic the Gathering because he's been playing a lot of Magic recently. And if anyone saw it, but he was playing Magic versus Ice Cream. Um, and we were chatting about different mechanics within that game and some things we would like to see in Scrolls. And I thought about it and I said to him, I was like, Magic has had 15 years, over 15 years of development and changes and sets, 15 years worth of sets that have come out. As well as a much larger player base and a lot more people working on the game. It's like they've they've done this. They're at the same point we're at, but they were at it, 10 years ago. Where they were getting over these
Yeah,
hurdles of how to make stuff balance, how to make stuff fun, how to make it interesting, how to have counterplay, and they got over that. But it took a long time, and I think that we're in that growing process now, where we're redefining the characteristics of the game and trying to make it both interesting, right, fun to play, but also give it counterplay so it's fun to play
exactly.
against. That's key.
I think that is really the problem with a lot of these suggestions of just nerfing Ward as it is, because it's very short-sighted. Yes, you're fixing the problem now,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not increasing the complexity that will come to the game in time as new scrolls are added, as you can uh, implement counters, and if you can implement more strategic gameplay by interacting with the board through combat, outside of combat, and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
really, I think people should be patient. I think they should just wait and see at least until the next set. Even if there aren't any ward counters then, we might see some in set 8. And either way,
Yeah.
I think that this problem will be solved in the year 2015,
Yeah, no,
more or
I
less.
think that all the problems that we've had in the past have been fixed with time, and I think the same is true right now. Nothing has changed. There were problems back then. Energy used to basically not exist in the meta, and now it is considered very, a decent in the meta. Right now it's considered the third best, and before it was just like so far below order and growth that it was just no one played it. Like
Yeah.
it never made any competitive play. But in time that got fixed, and I feel like the same is true for all these other mechanics. Now there's a lot more of them in now than there was back then, but like energy as a faction, these mechanics will get fixed in time.
Another
They
thing that was
just want the best for the
Yeah,
game.
another thing that was pointed out here by the Maester in the chat is the thing with Ward is that since Decay isn't in the meta, we don't have as much Slayer as we should see that can counter these mega buffed creatures. And if we get some rebalancing changes done that will make Decay so much more potent, players wouldn't go with the mega enchantment buff strategy because they know that it would run into Decay a lot of the time. And Decay has a lot
Mm.
of Slayer units, and Slayer is, to me, it's like a perfect counter to Ward because it's basically something that destroys it regardless of how many buffs you have on it.
Yep. And
And
he's right on the money there. What Mr. said there was completely true. If Decay gets a bit of balance, like you said, if Decay gets a little bit of rebalance, if it becomes back into the meta in some way, then we could see this balancing out by itself. You know what I mean? Like naturally, the game will balance itself out because there's counterplays already there, and we don't even have to change anything to the game. Um, of course, we're yet to see how the patch will affect Decay. Um, I am I'm not sure if it will be the be all end all of the case problems right now in the meta because they've received so many nerfs. I'm not sure if one patch is enough, but we also have a new set coming out. I'm very excited to see what will come with that new set. Maybe some more undead synergy, maybe some more traditional decay synergy, and decay will all of a sudden be back in the meta and be the number one deck again.
yeah,
Um,
I mean,
it's
I'm really
definitely
excited
possible.
about the Eager to Battle scroll with Decay because so many things in Decay that have really potent abilities, like giving poison or even Slayer, do have 2 attack or less. And even something like Neuro is hasted by Eager to Battle. So
Yeah.
even in the upcoming contest scrolls, we have a counter to King's Peace, and that is Eager Battle, which allows you to haste Slayer units.
But that's really cool. Also, this is encouraging multi-resource play.
Exactly.
This is a combo that could, in theory, I mean, Neural with haste, that's crazy. That could be so powerful. But the tempo that you would lose because you have to get to the point where you can pull that combo off. I mean, yes, you could obviously use things like Eclipse and stuff, but let's assume you're running a dual color deck here. The time it would take you to get to the point where you can do this combo, which is very, very strong, you would lose that time on the field, right? You would have a weaker board, and then it's your opponent's, time to get ahead and
Exactly.
really push ahead of you, and that could be really, really interesting. Um, and it is a very difficult balancing game to make it bounce like that. But I think adding more of these really interesting combos between the factions is a good step. It's a step in the right direction, definitely.
All right, I think that was the last of your ancient scrolls. I was hoping that some
Think
people would
so.
submit more scrolls to me. All I have now on the screen here is, I think, Andirant or Ghost Bombs, Brothers, Wolf Cannon. which I'm not sure if that's a serious submission. It's a 2 growth enchantment, can only be played on the Brother of the Wolf. Brother of the Wolf gains a lobber attack, and it shoots ragged wolves that bite people.
The question is, would it do the same amount of damage, or would the ragged wolf would it take that damage? You know,
Yes,
like
would the wolf explode, maybe? It would land and splash?
yeah, is there like TNT or something strapped to the wolf as it fires? Is that safe when you're firing it from a cannon? I mean, these questions need answering. There's no flavor
Yeah,
text.
Ghost
How am I
Bob, you need
to know?
to put some more work into this, explain things. But another thing we could do, if you have time for it, is give your opinion on sort of my fan-made scrolls.
Yeah, sure. I'm totally down for that. If you just
I'm gonna,
read them out
yeah,
to me so I
I'm
can
gonna
kind of get
send.
the.
I'll send you a link as well. Let me see.
Thank you. Yes, do
We're just gonna
send
take
as
a
well.
look at one of the factions.
Sure, yeah, because I know you're hard at work. You make many a scroll.
And I did a lot of reworking of these factions based on some feedback that guys submitted. So this one is probably going to be pretty new to a lot of people who have seen it already. Let me fix it.
Error.
All right, check your Skype instead. There we go, sent.
There we go. Yep, thank you. Pull this up.
Okay, so do you have that in front of you now?
Yep, I do.
All right, so wait a second. Imgur is messing up for me. Okay, here we go. Okay. All right. Jesus Christ. All right, there we go. So on the screen is the unique of the set for growth, and that is Elim, the Dryatic Guardian. He's a 6 growth human druid with 4 attack and 4 health and standard countdown. And while he is in play, healing heals for double the healing value. So if you play Pilgrim's Feet on a unit and you move it, I think that will heal for 4 instead of 2, if that is how much healing from Pilgrim's Feet does. And something like Regeneration is heal 2 every turn. But he also has an additional effect, and this is pretty relevant when it comes to him. If he is destroyed, he is replaced by an alternative kind of unique, which is Elim Dryatic Avenger. And this one you can't actually get into a deck naturally. You can only get him from Elim Dryatic Guardian.
I see, yeah. It's like a token unit.
Exactly. So this would be introduce non-collectible scrolls into the game that allows for kind of weirder, interesting effects without having to create basically a creature for every token you summon into the game. So he is same stat line, but while he is in play, healing an opponent unit will instead deal damage to them, equal to the healing value.
Interesting. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I like the idea of it being resummoned as a different unit. I think that's a really cool idea, and I'm surprised we haven't seen more of it. Right? That's a really interesting way to add to a card and make a card different. You know?
Exactly.
I can imagine a similar mechanic working in something like Decay, where you want some of your units to die, and then imagine if one of those units happens to come back even stronger. Like that's a really cool mechanic.
Like you could have this ghoul that basically upgrades every time it's dead. Basically, you could have something when it's killed in combat, it becomes a better version of itself. If it's killed outside of combat, that effect isn't triggered. So there's a lot of fun things you could do with it, but I also think that you take advantage of the digital nature of the game by doing this. In a physical TCG, you'd have to carry around this extra deck of cards with all these transformations. And I'm sure that players who have played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or MTG knows how annoying that can be when you have fusion monsters or whatever it is they're called. But with a digital game, the game engine is creating those extra scrolls for you. And it just seems like something that you should be able to take advantage of much easier in this sort of environment.
And you're exactly right there. I mean, the only examples of cards that are like two cards in one I can think of from Magic the Gathering is like the werewolf card, which you have to flip over and turn over. But then there's issues with like sleeves and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean they're a great idea. And even in if we're talking about the card game we shall not name, i.e. Hearthstone, they have
They
that.
they go overboard with it. I love it.
Yes, they have cards that you can't get in any capacity apart from with special conditions that are made there, and I think that's pretty interesting, and I think that adds a lot to the game. As long as it isn't RNG, something that turned me off about that was that it was somewhat RNG. There was
Yes, and
RNG
there's a lot of
aspects
bad
to it.
things, but something like Cairn Bloodhoof, it's a creature which summons basically an identical stat version of himself. So you know what you're
Hmm.
getting. And it's an interesting way of adding value to creatures, because the problem with scrolls is that you put down a creature, it has to wait 2 turns before it attacks into something.
Hmm.
And that means that you can't make removal tools powerful enough where you can stop aggro decks if you're playing something like Control. But if you give units this stickiness by having them summon another unit when they die, or another thing that's very popular in Hearthstone is battle cries. So the unit is always giving you value when you play it,
Yes,
and
yes.
I think they haven't done that enough in Scrolls. Both battle cries and these death rattles.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
no, I definitely agree with you there, and like you said, I think it would be a good way to pull back away from the aggro meta, which slowly but surely we'd be going more and more aggro as time has gone on, as the game of Scrolls has developed, as people have gotten better at the game and understood the game more. We've slowly drifted further and further away from
exactly,
the mono to where I would even argue that mono isn't really mono any like not mono, so excuse me, mid range, right? Mid range isn't really
yeah,
mid range anymore because mid range is the idea that it's in the middle. Well, it isn't in the middle anymore. The middle is the beginning now. If
yeah.
you
I
would
mean,
consider aggro,
there isn't really a middle. It's aggro, aggro, aggro until you get to Control.
yes,
And when you introduce these sort of things, death rattles, you can put them on more expensive units, which means that they will be out of reach from the aggro decks. And then you can buff up removal. So removal control will have an easier time versus aggro, but
hmm,
mid-range will have an easier time versus control, because their units will stick around even when they are destroyed. So
yeah.
that's really all I have to say about this one, and we can move on to the next one. And that is Druid of Earth, and that is another creature that will transform, but this time under a different condition. So he's a 3-cost human druid, 2/2/3, pretty poor stats for a 3-cost, but when a unit is healed, Druid of Earth is transformed into Bear Gestalt.
Oh, I like this.
And that thing is a real powerhouse. Like you can't put him in the game normally. He can only be
Hmm.
summoned in this way. He's a 5/5 with Relentless, but he has Pillage, which transforms him back into Druid of Earth. So here's a case for a slightly weak unit, a 3-cost. You can play him out, but you have to heal a damaged unit before you can turn him into this mega creature. So it might be tricky to get the activation off. And because he has 3 health, he is easy to destroy in one hit. But if you pull it off, you get mega value, so long as you avoid hitting idols.
I really like this idea because this is a really cool way. You talked about the transformation. This is a cool way of having it dynamically happen in a game, right? So the trigger is more determined instead of being determined by your opponent when they kill the creature. This is one that you can determine, right? When is the right time to heal your unit to turn it into a more buffed up unit? I can see so many big plays being made where you time it just right. Where you set up the heal, you save it until you need it, and then you use it, and all of a sudden you have this big hit unit that's going to do a lot. And even as a wall, it will be okay. And this is a cool idea. I like this a lot, actually.
And there's a
And
lot
this could,
more healing synergy coming up in these couple of scrolls, and that is,
I
I
was gonna,
think, an
I was gonna
interesting
say,
way of making healing more relevant to the game.
as a trigger, healing is an interesting one that we haven't seen before. We've seen ones with countdown. When countdown is X, it could be if for certain things it's when countdown is over a certain amount, but when countdown is lowered as this thing happens when countdown is 0, you may reset to do X, whatever that may be. But this having a trigger on a heal is a different way of doing it. We've also had stuff where triggers been, when enchantments are played, gain +1 attack or whatever. So this is a different way of doing triggers, and I think that's really important for scrolls because it makes the game feel fresh. It's different ways that different decks can be played. And I like this idea a lot, and I think that the healing idea as a trigger, as a clause to get something to happen in a game beyond just healing is very, very important and very, very cool. So yeah, I'm a fan of this. I like that one.
All right. Then we shall continue. So next up, okay. Next up is Druid of Sky. He is a 4-cost human druid, 2/4, with pillage. Summon a crow on a random tile on your side. So as he is pretty weak as a 4-drop, and you have to actually have him attack into an idol before you get the value from him. But when you do, you get pretty decent value because he summons a decent 2-cost, which is the Crow, which is a 2-cost, 2/2 with flying, but the Crow's countdown is not increased when flying.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think we should start with the druid first. Like you said, pretty bad stat line. Not great. 2/4. 4 health isn't bad, but I mean, the damage is the main issue there. Only at 2 damage. 4 costs is not
Exactly. I mean, you cannot counter him with something like a Languid with other attack debuffs.
Yes. Yeah, and that's cool that he has a counterplay built into him, and there is counterplay in the game already existing. I think the only concern I would have there is the 4 health, but at the same time, he's already 4 cost, right? So that's quite a high cost. I imagine that will be okay.
I mean, essentially what happens is if you manage to summon up a Crow, he turns into basically a 4-attack pseudo 6 health creature divided up over 2 bodies. And a 4/6 for 4 is very good. It's above the stat line. If a 4/5 is the vanilla for 4, it should be. I know the Sister of the Bear isn't a 4/2/5, but really 4 costs should be 4/2/5. Then he is 1 stronger, but you only get him that extra value if you pull off the pillage.
If he can get to attack, yeah.
And as you said, you can counter it with attack debuffs.
Yes, and that's pretty cool that there's built-in counterplay. I think it's not enough scrolls have built-in counterplay, honestly. But the crow that it summons is also interesting, and I think it's interesting more for the fact that flying, for me at least, when I see this, I look at it and go, oh yeah, flying isn't that helpful.
Exactly.
It's kind of pretty useless, which is a shame. I understand why it's the way it is, because if it was changed, it would be a very powerful ability, extremely powerful. The ability to run away consistently from fights, I think, is very powerful. It's why I'm surprised that Storm Knight is not more popular. I always thought that a unit with 2 movement will be the best creature in the game, but I was wrong. So I mean, it shows up.
I mean, when you think about it, it's almost like a pseudo flying. I mean, sure, you need to be able to have a clear path to your destination, but you can cover the entire board, basically. But I think that they should keep flying as is, but there should be room for these negate the downside of this trait, additional effects. And then you have to, of course, adjust the stat line. So the Crow at 2/2 is weaker than other 2-drops, but in return, it has increased mobility.
Yeah, and I also like how this something that you haven't touched on yet, but it also, because of its beast subtyping there, it would also gain certain benefits from other creatures as well, and other
exactly.
Other things as well. So it has some synergy play, which I think is also very, very important. Yeah, definitely interesting. But again, like I said, I think it speaks more to the fact that flying is not flushed out as a mechanic yet. And like you said, there is room to grow. There is room to have creatures that won't be affected by the downside of this. And I mean, I can totally see that.
That's true for a lot of the mechanics in Scrolls. It's still an early game. I think that people should be careful with trying to buff traits, buff mechanics, when we might see those things naturally buffed in the future as future interactions, future scrolls are added. Like if you treated Beast as a value point in a scroll's calculation when it comes to determining its costs, its values.
Hmm.
At the very beginning of when Scrolls was put into open beta, people would probably be resented that if beast creatures in general were weaker than human creatures. But nowadays, with so much beast synergy, you could almost make a case for beasts being weaker than
Yep.
humans.
Yep. Definitely. And that's right on the money is the fact that we have to be careful with whatever we do because some stuff hasn't reached its full potential yet. Because a buff can be not a direct buff, it could be an indirect buff, it could be just a buff overall to the subtype, opposed to the creature or the effect or whatever, and it can bring it into almost an overpowered state where it can be too powerful. Um, I actually fear this a lot for undead as a trait. I feel that
Yes.
we could get into the point where undead as a subtype is so powerful that every creature that has it is instantly top tier creature, must run creature. And I think if anything's going to do it, it's probably going to be undead. So
Yeah, I mean, you have to really be careful there as well. It goes into both directions. It can become too much strong and then he has to be buffed. But it could be done through mechanics by adding stuff that makes undead worse, generally. But we move on
mhm.
here with the Dryad. It's a 4 cost, 4 attack, 2 countdown, 2 health creature with the Dryad subtype. So making it kind of like a Elder in energy, the only creature with such a subtype. And when Dryad comes into play, it comes into play hidden. And this is something I'll need to elaborate a little bit on, so bear with me as I find the explanation for it. Okay, so hidden means this. Attacks pass through this unit. This unit cannot be targeted by the opponent's spells, enchantments, or abilities. When this unit attacks, hidden is removed.
Okay. Interesting. Um,
Initially, I wanted this to be kind of like the stealth mechanic that a lot of people have wanted in the game that turns a creature invisible. But I figured it's not going to be fun. It's not fun to
it wouldn't
not
work.
know where your opponent creature is. But
Yeah.
you can almost make a pseudo variant of that through the hidden mechanic. So yes, you are now practically immune to aggressive plays by your opponent. But
It's
at the same
guaranteed to
time,
hit.
it is, it's going to avoid everything. But at the same time, it's not a blocker. You can't protect an idol. You can't uh, block more, important creatures.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
no,
it,
this is interesting because it will be guaranteed that hit, right? If I heard you correctly, right, with the hidden trait, it almost is guaranteed to hit
yeah,
all the
and
time.
it's only temporary as well. So when it attacks, it's
When it
gone,
attacks, it disappears off it, so it gets a hit in,
and
right?
it's kind of like a temporary super ward.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting because like you said, the trait that a lot of people wanted for a while, including myself. In fact, I just opened my drawer to find it, but I can just remember what it was. One of the skills that I never made that I thought of was incorporating this idea of stealth mechanics, which would be a smoke bomb. It was going to be order, and it was going to place a cloud in the same way that like a lobber like diamond effect would be, and then you wouldn't be able to see what creatures were inside that and what creatures were moving around in that. The problem with that is that it wouldn't work in the game. In fact, any stealth mechanic, as far as not seeing your opponent's units, will be really not fun to
Yeah,
play versus in Scrolls. It just wouldn't work for the type of game it is. And that's a shame, but it is also just a trait of the board mechanic of the game. It doesn't fit. This is a cool way to get around it and still have that theming of being hidden, of being out the way, of that stealthy feel. And
exactly.
like you said, it also has the ward mechanic in there, or like a super ward almost, where it is invulnerable to all these different things, which means that you can have it be slightly stronger than it usually would be, or it could be slightly stronger than it would if it wasn't to have that. I can't even speak today. It will be stronger than it would be if it didn't have that hidden trait, right? So creatures
Yeah,
that normally like this wouldn't be run, I don't think, as 2 health is too low. Well, with this hidden ability, it has a chance to be run. It actually has potential to be used in a deck. Whereas I feel like if this was just a regular card that didn't have this effect, you wouldn't want to run it because why would you want to run something with 2 health?
exactly. But at the same time, you can counter this with AoE stuff, with spells that don't have a target. So
Yes.
that's why I want to see more of that sort of things in the game. So you have interesting counterplay. You have these sort of hidden mechanics that counter direct target stuff and that counters combat. But at the same time, your opponent might have access to something in the vein of the old Necrogeddon. So the old Necrogeddon was destroy all creatures, and then your
Hmm.
opponent draw 2 scrolls. I think that a scroll like that should be in the game. Like maybe it would have to cost a lot more, but it should be a thing in the game. This should be an ultimate answer to a creature.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah,
But
I'm not sure if I entirely agree with that, but I definitely see your point, and I think that there is room in the game for a mechanic such as that, um, as
but
far as that
but to
ultimate
go
answer
back
to
to this
combat.
creature now.
Yeah, sorry.
So it has a hidden thing, and like you said, that means you get 1 attack off guaranteed.
Hmm.
If you haste it up to attack sooner, you just lose the hidden protection earlier. So at the
Hmm.
same time, I've added another buff to it, and that is the secondary ability, which is while Dryad is in play, your other creatures have regeneration. Now, normally, as you said, if it didn't have hidden, that would be a pretty poor effect, because
Hmm.
your opponent could just target this, remove it with a soul steal, and then that effect wouldn't come into play. But because it's hidden, you can have slightly weaker effects, and that means essentially healing, and have it be valuable. Because for 2
Yeah,
turns, before it attacks, your units will be slightly tougher.
which is quite nice. And healing is, I mean, it isn't the strongest effect in scrolls, right? Um, but I feel like that's also because it's attached to creatures that can't make full use of it. Like
Yeah,
as a mechanic, it isn't flushed out. I'm saying this a lot, but it's true. It isn't on the right stuff right now, and the stuff it's on isn't strong enough to make it worth running. But something like this, where you actually will have the time to make full use of it, I could definitely see this being played, and I could definitely see it being worthwhile to have in the game, if nothing more than to buff that trait, to buff Regentia.
exactly. And this is again another healing scroll, and that has synergy with the previous one, that
Yep.
Druid of Earth, which transforms into a bear. And there's going to be another one coming up, which is Druid of Sea. And that is a 4-cost human druid with 3 attack, 2 countdown, and 4 health. And whenever a unit is healed, Druid of the Sea gets +1 attack and +1 health. So again, to clarify, these sort of effects only trigger when something damaged is being healed. So playing a
Yeah.
healing spell on a full health creature will not trigger all these things.
Yeah, and that's important as well, because without that, this could be overpowered, right? Because then it would be an infinite spiral of getting
Exactly.
stronger and stronger. In one turn, you could heal it 3 or 4 times, and all of a sudden, it's this crazy creature. But something that's interesting about that, though, is that encourages, especially this scroll. The first thing I see at this scroll, when reading it and looking at its stats and so on, to go, this is a comeback scroll. This is a
Exactly.
scroll you can use when you're not ahead, when you're behind slightly, and you could heal up your creatures and buff up this, so it can start taking stuff out. And I think that's a really good idea, and something that the game needs
Exactly.
more of is comeback mechanics. Um, Mangonel Speed Focus was so good because it was a comeback mechanic. Mangonel is still really good because it's a great comeback mechanic. Quake is still a comeback mechanic. These classic scrolls that I associate with the glory days of both Growth and Order, when they were at their strongest, you know, they've either been nerfed directly or indirectly being nerfed because they were so good at coming back into the game.
And yeah, and a
I,
problem with combat scrolls such as that is that they come back by removing your opponent's creatures. Whereas
my
this
point,
is a
yes.
combat scroll that just strengthens your board by healing your creatures and then getting a slightly over the stat curve creature out there.
Exactly, and it's just that's the point I was going to move on to, is the fact that both of those scrolls are so attached to just killing off your opponent's board. There's nothing to really be like. Something that I've always disliked about scrolls is that a lot of the time top players won't like try to build up a new force of units elsewhere on the board if they're doing badly. Normally they try and play into them and just beat them down, because the comeback mechanics in the way they work now in the game in scrolls is just to bash your head against the wall and just try and take your opponent down and get the board back in your favor. Well, what an interesting mechanic will be is something like this, where you heal your units to get back into the game. You weather the storm, as it were. And as you're doing that, you're also buffing up another unit, which means that you'll be able to make a play after you've come back into the game. And I think that's I think that's definitely something that the game needs more than anything else, is better comeback mechanics
Yeah,
and different
definitely.
comeback mechanics.
So we'll move on to the next one, which is basically what I envisioned. This thing was created a couple of weeks ago, and I created one for each resource, and it's my attempt of basically countering ward and mega enchanted units directly. So this is a 3-cost structure, Earthborn Totem. It has 2 countdown and 4 health, no attack. And when Earthborn Totem's countdown is 0, you may reset its countdown to transfer all enchantments from target unit to another target unit. So this is something that would bypass ward, because ward doesn't protect against unit abilities. So if your opponent goes with the strategy of a mega buffing a unit, you can just snag all those enchantments and put it on one of your own creatures.
That's cool. And you know what's also good about that is that because it has countdown 2 before it can do anything, your opponent will have, if your opponent's playing smart, he'll have good positioning, right? But if he has a god unit, he has to keep his god unit in a good place, you know what I mean? So that when you place this down, he has 2 turns to deal with that, or else he's going to be in real trouble.
Exactly.
You know,
I mean,
he's going to be in a bad spot.
you're introducing a loss condition if you're playing that sort of deck.
Yes, it puts them on the clock. It gives them a timer to do something, and I think that's an interesting idea. And I definitely think that something like this is required for the game. And your way of getting around ward is really clever. You know, I didn't think about that. The fact that it doesn't block, you know, effects coming from units. You know, in this case, a structure or a totem. So that's a really cool way of getting around it. Besides just saying, "Oh, it goes through ward." You know, it's a spell that goes through ward. I know ward's meant to block.
That's so lazy, I think.
You know, yeah, exactly. And this is a really cool idea, and I like this.
And I mean, furthermore, if your opponent don't have that sort of mega strategy unit, you can make use of this on your own side by passing enchantments from, you know, one creature on your side to another creature that is on the other side of the board. And just, you know, generally introduce a sort of interesting strategic plays. You might have already put down an Earthen Merfolk on one of your Ragged Wolves, but that's not attacking this turn. But you have this other creature which is attacking. You just transfer that Earthen Merfolk.
That's cool, because I can also see in my head when I think about this is like, if this was in the game, this hypothetical was in the game, I could see further down the line there be decks and scrolls and cards that will be based around maybe buffing your opponent, right? There are already there's a 1-cost decay one that gives it more health but then does damage to the idol that is behind. Regeniture, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's Regeniture, yeah. That is a perfect example. No, it works like that. Regeniture gives the enchanted unit +2 health, and it has a come into play effect that is negative.
Yes. So then I could see yourself using this to put it back on your side, so then you would get the benefit.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you could like, it would always be like a new deck type where you buff your opponent and then take the buffs away from them and use them on your own creatures. But those buffs that you're putting on your opponent also have negative effects for them. That would be a really cool mechanic, and I think that this opens the door for that kind of play to exist, and I think that will be cool.
I mean, it opens up the design space because you can add now more enchantments with negative coming into play effects, and you allow for counters, a way to counter these negative effects, and, you know, make advantage of them. And there should be more things like that, where you can turn a downside into an upside if you have the scrolls required and the situation for it.
Scrolls, correct play, you know, the foresight to see these kind of things happening. Exactly, you're right on the money.
So now we're going to move on to my idea of multi-resource support. So there's a whole cycle of these in each one of my resource 15 scroll parts of this set. And it essentially is like a dual resource support kind of thing. So this is Dark Berserk, 3 growth, enchantment. While Dark Berserk is in play, your growth also counts as decay. So let me first explain this mechanic. And the idea I have here is to allow for multi-resource decks that don't have to rely on ramping. So you can put in decay scrolls into your deck, but you never
Yes.
actually sack for them. You just go growth all the way. And then when you have enough decay scrolls in your hand to justify playing them, you play Dark Berserk on something. And now your 6 growth, your 5 growth, can be used to play those decay scrolls. So in a way, you are getting this sort of replenish effect, but it's more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And you are able to use it over several turns, which makes multi-resource decks more consistent, more reliable.
Interesting. I'm thinking in my head because it's an interesting way of getting around the problem, like you said, of ramp, right? The only way to get multicolored decks working right now, there's basically two ways that I see. The first way is you use ramp, right? Use wild, use ramp, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The other way you do it in my head is you run Eclipse, and Eclipse is the only other one in the game that I can think of
Great
for like
rule.
splash decks where you splash into decay with you get Eclipse and you get one other thing. You do this big play where you go Eclipse, right? But this will be an
Yeah.
interesting way of getting around that and giving another option for dual colored decks. The only concern I have with this, and there is more to the card, I know, but the only concern I have to this is that it might be too strong if it's too cheap, but too weak if it's too expensive. It's a
Yeah.
very difficult one to balance.
I mean, most of these I've priced at around 3 resources because I think that's the sweet point. It's not cheap enough that stuff like Gojo's would have a crazy time with it, but it
Mhm.
will support aggro in the later stages. It would support mid-range throughout the entire stage. Because this is a perfect spot for a mid-range deck, more or less.
Mhm.
And sure, you can as a control deck basically treat this as a replenish card. At 10 growth, play this thing, use your 7 growth to play Necrogeddon.
Yeah.
And that's an expensive combo, but I think that's fine to have. Because multi-resource decks just are so weak. Unless you're playing some sort of ramp deck, you're not going to play multi-resource. That's a problem.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, there's a bigger problem there. But yes, you're completely right. The only decks that have come out of multi-resource have been ramp decks and extremely broken decks, right? Like, there's been a few. Well, no, they all incorporate ramp in some way. Like, that's the
Well,
whole
the
reason
only
that they
thing
were
that
there.
doesn't is that Mystic deck. That doesn't have any ramp.
Oh, yes, because everything's so cheap that you wouldn't have to, and it's
And
like,
everything is replenish.
yes, replenish up. Yes, that is silly.
But other than that, everything involves ramp.
Yeah.
But we're going to
Yeah.
move on here now with the effects of this thing, because just having this sort of effect, I don't think that would be enough. Because you want to play something and also get value of that card. Otherwise, you're spending one card for an Eclipse-like effect, only
Yeah.
sure it lasts over several turns. So in
Yep.
this case, the Enchanted Kinfolk is poisoned when Dark Berserk comes into play. And that is a negative, but it encourages healing use. Because you can then counter that negative by healing the enchanted unit.
Yeah.
And then the Enchanted Kinfolk, so you can only play this on a Kinfolk, has Slayer, which is a decay trait, more or less. But since this is a decay growth supportive scroll, I justify bringing in other resource mechanics, more or less.
Yeah, that's a cool way to bridge the gap, right? When you're making a card that's meant to work with both factions, a good way to bridge it and make it feel like it's a card that belongs in both is to give it a trait that one or the other has that the other one does not. Things like piercing for energy, that is only for energy. Relentless is in decay and it's also in growth, but it's something I associate with order, right? And Slayer is something I associate with decay. So that's a cool and interesting way of bridging the gap and making it feel like a card that belongs in both. I'm trying to think. The poison. I mean, like you said, it encourages the healing, so you heal it off. My only actually, I don't know. No, I think that's okay. I think it's okay.
I mean, I was a bit unsure as myself, because it is Slayer. I mean, you could easily play this without just bothering with a decay growth deck.
Yeah,
Because you're
that's my
getting.
concern.
But
I'm
on the
trying
other
to
hand,
think.
3 growth for Slayer, sure, you can put on a Ragged Wolf for a 4-cost hasted Slayer creature.
Mm-hmm.
But that is only 1 growth cheaper than an Earthmurf. And you have to deal with the poison. But ultimately, there is a general power creep in these sets in this set that I've created.
Mm-hmm.
So while this growth thing might seem very powerful, there are equally powerful things in all the other sets, because my
Sure.
idea for a more dynamic game is to have more powerful creatures and more powerful enchantments and also more powerful removal tools. So just in general, everything gets more powerful.
I don't want to go off topic, but yes, the problem is we need power creep because we've had the exact opposite for so long. Um, I mean, like I said, I don't want to get off topic, but we've literally, whenever there's been a problem in the past with certain scrolls or decks or whatever, the immediate answer to that has always been nerf it if it's OP. If it's OP, just nerf it. It'll be
Yeah,
quick
exactly.
fix, clean fix. The problem is it is a quick fix and it may be a clean fix in the short run, but long term, especially now, and I don't know about other people, I don't want to speak for other people, but me personally, I feel that everything has been nerfed so much. The game feels a lot more tame than it used to, right? There isn't as many powerful things in the
Yeah,
game.
I agree.
And I feel like we could do with some power creep, like big time we could do with some power creep. Like I hope that the next set has power creep in it because it will spice the game up again, you know? And it's a very difficult balance to make. And like I said, I don't want to get too off topic on this, but something like this I could see. I'm not sure if this is maybe a touch too powerful. I'm not sure though. I would have to see it in play to really, get a grasp on if it's too good, too weak, etc.
Yeah, and I'm saying, don't have continuously power creep. Don't power creep set after set after set.
No, no, no,
I'm
no,
just
no,
saying
no.
right now, it's too weak. The game is too weak, generally.
Yes,
It needs
yes.
one or more couple of sets of power creeping, and then we can stay at that level of power.
Yeah, yep,
But we're
definitely.
going to move on here to the next scroll, which is the second multi-resource tool, and that is Oath Axe. While Oath Axe is in play, your growth also counts as order. Enchanted creature has +3 attack if none of your idols has been destroyed. So this is very
Hmm.
powerful. It will
Yes.
mostly buff Gojo decks,
I was going to say this will bring Gojos back into meta 100% if this was in the game,
but at the
I
same
think.
time, your opponent can actually counter the really strong effect by destroying an idol.
Mhm.
And that is, again, more counterplay in ways that are possible in multiple ways. You can destroy an idol through combat. You can destroy an idol through spells. There are multiple ways through the destruction of an idol is possible, and that makes a very good counterplay, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Instead of just destroying this creature. I mean, sure, that is also a counter, but it's not often possible if it's hidden behind blockers or if it's warded, for example.
I think what this comes down to is although this is not a god creature, +3 attack is not going to make a god creature, right? It is along that for how early you can play this, right? It is along that those lines of making a very very powerful creature early. But unlike any other like King's Piece, this has a
Yeah,
counterplay to it, a counterplay built into the card, and a way that when you see this being played, if I saw this being played and I'm playing Decay, I go, okay, I'm now going to try and take an idol out as quickly as possible because I don't want this thing doing that extra damage on the board. Definitely not, especially if it's on like a Brave or something.
yeah,
Like that's going to be my new mission for that next few turns. I'm going to want to kill an idol more than anything else, and that's going to be in the games played as well. So yeah, no, I think that's cool.
yeah. And for anyone worried about an Oath Axe on a Brave, yes, that is super powerful. But at the same time, in the other sets, I mean, in the other parts of this set, there's a lot of counters and just a lot of options of destroying and removing problematic creatures. So, something like this, too powerful for the game at the moment, but if you introduce more powerful scrolls in general, it'll be fine. I think this is
Yep,
a
this will
sort of
fit.
strength that an enchantment should have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, I like that because it has a counterplay built into it, and like you said, it's a higher level than what the game is at right now. It's more powerful than anything that's in the game right now, but that's good because the game is too weak right now. Everything is too weak. Everything needs to be brought up a level, brought up one notch, two notches maybe, so that we can have a more fluid and fun and interesting and dynamic game.
I mean, in
Instead
all
of
honesty, I
so
kind of
hostage.
miss the old Harvester at 6 health, and even the old Necrogeddon at 6 decay.
Yeah, I miss a lot of things in Decay. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, like Mangonel Speed Focus is the one that I've always missed. And I know it's very strong. I know it's crazy good. And it's the best comeback mechanic in the game. and I understand that, but it's also such an expensive combo, and it was such a cool thing because people would have to, like, back then, people would have to play around mangonels, like
Yeah,
really play around mangonels. Whereas now, I watch every ESL, I cast every, every other Brag and Brawl. I'm involved in a lot of different tournaments. There's so many games where people are playing against order, late game order. They know they have mangonels to play around. They don't even bother. They don't
I
care.
know. I
And
know.
it pains me because it's like the level of play is getting lower because we don't have to play around these sort of mechanics anymore, and that really makes me sad. Like even Thunder Surge, I feel like Thunder Surge can do more damage than
Yeah, it's
anything else
honestly,
if you play badly, and it happens all the time, and no one cares. Like, oh
I think honestly they could buff Thunder Surge because
yeah,
it's such a clever thing. I mean, you can easily play around it. Just don't
yeah,
connect your units.
yeah.
So I mean, yeah, definitely the game overall needs some
Yeah,
buffs,
I
but we're
mean,
gonna.
there's nothing more to say apart from the fact that everything's been brought down to a point where you don't have to play around, and the game's lost skill, and it's lost like that depth that is required, I think, for a TCG. Not that it's gone forever, definitely not.
No, no,
I think
definitely
this
not.
game is 100% going to be okay. Like a lot of people are saying, like, oh, the game's going to die because they're nerfing or they're bringing in all these unbalanced cards. Like, no, 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 no. The game's going to be fine because they're bringing in these cards that may seem, unbalanced, or they're nerfing these things and make the game unfun. There's a turning point, people. Like it can turn
Yeah,
around at any point, and I hopefully devs will not realize, but try out some of these suggestions that come out from the community where we do try and suggest these things that might be unconventional, a bit powerful for the current game, because I think that they will improve the game overall. And again, I'm getting off topic here. This is a totally different discussion, but
no, but I mean that's basically the idea for this whole set. It is my idea of, if I was in position of developers, how would I make this game more fun, more dynamic, more balanced?
Mhm.
Just make a bunch more powerful scrolls, make it a lot easier to play multi-resource, and that would probably fix a lot of the problems. It might
Yep.
introduce new problems, but I think overall you'd benefit from it.
Yeah, and I think people are tired of the old problems. I think we could do with some new ones, honestly, something new to talk
Yeah,
about at the
that's
very
the thing.
least.
It's fine to have new problems. It's fun, but when you have Lock and Brood not working with Pother for 4 months, it just turns into a sad joke at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
But we'll move on to the next scroll here. And that is Tangle Seed, a 4-growth enchantment. Units adjacent to the enchanted unit have -2 move.
Interesting. This is a pretty good counterplay to things like Witch Doctor. Because
Yes,
obviously with a Witch Doctor, you want to surround that Witch Doctor, you want to protect the Witch Doctor, and something like this would be quite annoying for the person to deal with. But
it's
it also has
kinda
counterplay because you can
exactly.
still move the unit that is affected to. I mean, it's a common trend here, but I think you really nailed it when it comes to having scrolls that have counterplay, which is important.
I mean, even more than that, this scales in power. So the further ahead your opponent is, the more creatures they will have on the board. And
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
means that the effect from this thing will get stronger and stronger, because it will be harder for them not to have units adjacent to each other. And
Mhm.
that means you can lock down, if they go to that point where they have one creature fully surrounded by creatures, you can lock down all those creatures with this one enchantment until you have, built up your forces and then go in and attack them. And that would strengthen mid-range and control growth decks
Yeah.
in a way that
I
makes
part
sense for growth.
something in my head, I'm thinking that maybe order players would hate this, really, really hate this. But in part of me also thinks though that maybe growth should have a slight buff versus order, right? Especially considering the
Definitely.
changes that are coming in the latest test patch. Maybe that growth should have a slight buff versus order. And again, this is a comeback mechanic. So, and I think the game needs comeback mechanic. We were just talking about this. So, yeah, no, I can see this. I like this. I think this is good.
I
I
mean,
think the
thematically,
cost is
it's
just
it's
right
just
too.
like a binding route, only in a mass version.
Yeah, yeah. I think the cost is good too. I think if it was any, I think at first I was like, oh, maybe it should be one cheaper, maybe it should be at 3. But I think at 3 it's a little bit too annoying to deal
Yeah,
with. At 4, you won't. I mean, you'll see it in aggro decks, right? But you won't have it straight away in aggro
exactly.
decks, which I think is important.
And that's the
And
thing.
it will,
I aim this more at mid-range control decks because, as you
yes,
said, at 3 growth, I think a lot of aggro decks would run this in addition to Rumble or instead of Rumble, because you could lock down an entire row, make it harder for your opponent to get to those 2 idols.
Yep.
But at 4, it's more of a tool for a later growth deck. Okay, so we are going to move on to the next scroll. And this is really just this is submission I sent in to the contest, and it doesn't fit in with these other scrolls really, but I'll just hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I haven't seen this yet, so. Let me just hang on. I'm just getting the thing. There we go. Okay, let me have a gander at this one here. I'm not going to read it out because my reading out voice is horrible. I don't know if you want to read it out, Squiddy, for the people at home, but
yeah, I'll read out of them. So, Dramatic
sure.
Boon is a 1 growth enchantment with Pillage. Return enchanted unit to the controller's hand. So this is the unit that is enchanted with Dramatic Boon. It can be your unit, it can be your opponent's unit. But it has an additional effect. Enchanted unit deals an additional 2 damage to enchanted units it attacks.
Interesting. Okay. Let me think. Where would I want to use this? Well, obviously, I would want to use it against people that are running enchantments, right? This is an okay way to pull back god decks, right? Because you're gonna be hitting people.
I mean, if you
Interesting that it returns to your hand as well, and it also doesn't
exactly.
guarantee bonus damage on top of that. So that's interesting.
So what you could do, for example, is you could put this on one of your own creatures. You could use that Earthborn totem that I showed off earlier to transfer this enchantment to a warded unit on your opponent's side. And then that warded unit won't be able to run
Yeah.
into an idol.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good combo as well. If they were both in the game, that would be a good combo to deal with god decks.
But at the same time, you might as well just steal all their enchantments.
That's true. That's true.
So yeah, this is basically a slightly weaker version of an anti-ward,
Yeah, I
anti-enchantment
think
tool.
I mean, it's at 1 cost, right? I think the only issue is that it's a tiny bit weak. At least I think it's a tiny bit weak. I'm not sure. I'm trying to visualize it against the decks that it will be most effective versus, and I'm not sure if it will be strong enough to deal with them. At the same time, it is a good way to have counterplay built in for a cheap cost scroll.
And really, that's
I'm really
it. I
not
just
sure on this
tried to
one.
create a sort of cheap, maybe not that powerful scroll, to kind of
Hmm.
put these other more powerful scrolls in perspective.
I think it's good. I think it could just go into the game how it is. I don't think it would need any changes, any buffs or nerfs or anything like that.
All right, then we'll move on to the next one. And this is basically my idea of making the human and kinfolk subtype in growth actually matter. And it's a 3-cost spell, Warcry. Humans count down 1 and have their attack increased by 1 until the end of your opponent's turn. So it's like a Fury, but it only affects humans, but it also gives them +1 attack. So
Yeah.
it would be
Okay.
awkward to run in a deck where you have a lot of beasts. Ideally, you'd run this in a deck where you mostly have humans.
I like this, and I like this purely because of the fact that right now it feels like there isn't a good it feels like the beasts are so good right now, right? They're so good. Like beast decks are amazing, and the kingfolk don't really have too much synergy within themselves compared to the beasts, right? The beasts have things like Colin the Flock, and they have obviously Great Wolf, and all the wolves have really good synergy with each other. Whereas the human side of things, the kingfolk side of things, doesn't have as good synergy with themselves
Yeah,
as they probably should have, considering they're kingfolk. Like the idea, like the whole word is based around a sense of camaraderie of working together and stuff. So yeah, I think something like this is very necessary in the game. I would make it stronger than this. I would increase the cost, but
yeah.
make it even stronger.
I figured it is actually too weak. You could easily make this. Right now, it's symmetrical, so it affects humans on your side and your opponent's
Yep.
side.
Oh,
But
okay. Yeah, that's
it
true.
would be fine just affecting your own humans, I think.
Yeah.
Because compared to rallying would be 2 more, but it decreases countdown by 2.
Mhm.
This thing only affects a specific subtype on your side. It decreases the countdown by 1, but it also increases the attack by 1. And I think that would be balanced enough.
Okay, so because it affects both sides, it might be okay. I'm not sure. I think it will be okay if it affects both sides, which I misunderstood at the time. If it affected just one side,
I mean, sure, people are saying it's a mini God Hand. You play 2 of these, that's a God Hand. But it's only a God Hand for humans. And when you think about it, there's nothing in growth with Relentless that
yeah. See, this is
is
this is the
human.
thing when you say it's a mini god hand, it's like, well, yeah, it's a mini god hand, but then let's think about when you play a god hand, what is the actual things that are doing damage? Normally, it's a great wolf. It might be a striped fang bear. Sometimes it's like a wetland ranger's doing a bit of damage in there. You know, normally, apart from maybe wetland ranger and maybe if you have some braves on the board, it's normally the beasts that are doing the majority of the damage. It's the relentless beasts. You know, it's
I
the
mean,
great
sure,
wolf.
you
It's the
got
striped
the
fang
you
bear.
got the Jarls, but those things are expensive. They should be easy
No one
to
uses
count them down.
no one uses Jarls anymore. I mean, the Jarl is good and it's okay, but I think this is the issue. That like something like this is required because the Jarls have no synergy with each other. Right? You
Yeah,
can't get away with playing a big unit that's that expensive without there being synergy with the subtype it has. Great Wolf costs 5, which for beasts is fairly expensive, right? Most beasts are below
yeah,
that cost. But the reason Great Wolf is so good is because it has incredible synergy, incredibly good synergy with other wolves, which are other beasts. It also has Culling the Flock, and it has all these other things that make it really, really powerful, which mean that when you're playing beast decks, you're more than happy. Like people don't even think twice about playing Great Wolf. Like they don't, it's too good. Why would you not play it? But with like a Jarl, I've seen many times where people can play the Jarl, but instead just go, it's not that good. Let's just sacrifice it and play something else that's cheaper, you know? And that's weird to me. And I think the big problem is that it doesn't have synergy. I don't think this would be that bad. Yeah, it's a mini God hand,
yeah.
but I don't think it's that big of a deal.
And I mean, when you think about it, this is still in line with the other effects in growth. Countdown
Hmm.
reduction in growth is board wide. It is generally not discriminatory, but in a case like this, you can make an argument that it feels to me thematically appropriate. You have kinfolks essentially rallying to battle in a smaller version. But we are going to move ahead with another card which is similar to this. And it's basically a mini rallying but for beasts. Because I figured you need to differentiate a little bit when it comes to beasts and human and give them sort of different ways of counting down while still adhering to the growth theme of mass board effects. So this is a forecast spell. Beast creatures you control have their countdown decreased by 2, so it's 1 cheaper than rallying with the same
Hmm.
effect, only it affects beast. But when beast creatures you control did not destroy another creature at the end of this turn, they are dealt 2 magic damage.
Interesting. Okay. I think I like the idea, right? Especially the idea that if you don't do well enough in that round, then you're going to take damage, right? There's going to be a negative effect if you
Yeah,
can't make use of them. The only problem I see with this is that because beasts already have so much synergy and are so good right now, I can see this being I can see it being an issue if only because there are things like culling the flock in the game already, and there are the striping bears already, and obviously there are great
yeah.
wolves, and even ragged wolves could probably. I mean, they would die, but you would still play it and lose them, I think, and be happy with that. I think this is a bit too strong, honestly. I'm not sure how you could balance it.
I mean,
If you increase the cost, then it's weak.
initially
Mm.
I was thinking if a creature didn't destroy another creature, it would be destroyed at the end of the turn.
Right. Yeah. 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 That would be crazy because then
Yeah,
that would be way too weak. I feel because then you would lose so much stuff. But at 2, I feel like you would keep a lot of stuff at the same
it
time.
might just be that you have to increase it to 3 magic damage, because then you're also basically you're sacrificing a lot of beasts unless you can get into a good position. And the thing is here, if your opponent is ahead of you,
Hmm.
your creatures will have a higher chance of actually destroying their things. If you're ahead of them, this scroll will hurt more, a lot more, because you won't be destroying as many creatures with your creatures. So basically,
Um,
it punishes attacking idols unless you can actually
yeah,
win with it.
yeah. It encourages you to go for the kill opposed to going for like we're rallying. Then there's no downside for going for the win, right? Or like going for idols or
Yeah,
whatever it may be. With this, there would.
but yeah,
I'm
it
not
it
sure.
it
I'm not
needs.
sure. That one's difficult for me to nail down because the beasts are, in my opinion, so good right now. Like as a
They
subtype,
really
they're
are.
just already really good.
I mean, ideally, humans in growth would be just as good as a sort of synergistic tribe,
Yep.
and then you could buff up beasts again a little bit.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
humans
Yeah.
have a lot more to go until
Yeah,
we're
I
at
think
that point.
that's the problem I'm at here is that beasts are already so good. I'm like, well, okay, well, you got to be careful about making them even stronger because they're already the preferred choice. Um, yeah, interesting idea, definitely. I like the idea of there being a drawback if you can't make full use of it.
All right, so we're moving on to the next one, which is Dryad Tears, and it's a 3-cast spell which will heal units on target tile and adjacent tiles by 2. So
Pretty
very
simple. I
simple
don't
heal.
think there's too much that needs to be discussed about this. It synergizes with the other ones. Would
Exactly.
probably be run in all of those. I think the only thing I will talk about is that the fact that it's a common and that there is a judgment and obviously draft.
Yeah,
Um,
like maybe it would have to be more rarity-wise at like an
yeah,
uncommon or
that
rare level.
I mean that's the first thing that comes to mind when I see this because that could be really annoying. But apart from that, I think this is fine. I think it will be run in those decks. I mean, there's all like you said, if we're imagining this whole set gets added, right? All these growth cards get added to the game. This would be a great card for that synergy and probably see some play. It's probably the strongest heal, just insta heal there
Yeah,
would be.
I
I
mean,
can't
I
think of
think
one that's
growth
better.
should have access to the strongest heals in the game.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes sense, right? Their growth.
Yeah,
It's part of the thing. Like the way you would describe growth is healing, you know. Um,
but yeah, I mean, I designed all of these scrolls with kind of each other in mind.
yeah,
So I'm going to go back and look at the previous ones, which are synergistic with it.
that will be
So we have the
Braddock
Druid of the Sea.
Guardian. Yeah, okay, you go for him.
Yeah, so Druid of the Sea, he gets buffed up. It's a lot easier to heal a lot of things. And you'll heal multiple units, which give this thing multiple buffs.
Hmm.
Similarly, it gets a lot easier to transform the Druid of the Earth because you don't have to rely on these single target heals, which you might not want to run in your deck, because generally they will provide poor value. But the most fun interaction is with the Elim Dreadic Avenger, because that would turn any healing spell in your deck into an offensive spell, but only
Yes,
conditionally.
yes, that's interesting. Hmm. I don't see. You know what? That's okay. I think 2 damage for free, there's a condition that has to be met
Yes,
before it would
which
actually do
requires you
that.
to put out a 6-cost unit that then has to
Yeah,
die.
yeah, you're not going to get that early. Yeah, that's fine. That's
And
fine.
in a way, that will kind of buff up again late gamey growth deck types.
Yeah, that will. I mean, that will be the combo, right? That would actually be a very, very valuable combo if you can pull it off. But then again, at the same time as saying that, though, that, you have to use the healing for other things in this. If you want to get the full synergy
Exactly.
going, you're gonna need, you're gonna have to use those free scrolls in a pretty valuable way. So
So I mean, you'd ideally have things that benefit from healing your things, but then in certain situations, you can turn it into an offensive tool.
yeah,
Deal damage to them often when you're behind, because this thing it'll probably be destroyed when your opponent is on the offensive. So when they have the board presence, when they have the attacking creatures, and then you'll be in a little underdog situation, play your healing spells to get rid of their stuff, and then you're kind of more or less on equal terms again.
yeah, no, that's cool. I like that.
Okay, and now we're here at the last scroll in this part of the growth cards. And that is the final cross-resource synergy scroll. Is primal energies to growth, linger 4. While primal energies is in play, your growth also counts as energy. When primal energies comes into play, increase the linger duration of all linger spells in play by 1. So something I've done with all of these cross-resource support scrolls is that they all have a beneficial effect that you'd want to play in a mono-resource deck. In this case, it's increasing the linger duration of your linger spells by 1. So if you have a strategy which revolves around having multiple lingering spells, then you can play this to just, buff up those.
Yeah, see, that's cool because that leads into the strategy that you would already be running, right? This just adds on to whatever plan you already had in motion, you know? But it's also balanced because it has lingering, right? Because it isn't going to last forever. You only get so many uses out, which means you're probably going to want to sack into both not sack into both, but you're probably going to want to, like, not have too many cards in energy, right? Because you're only going to have this for 4 turns and then you're going to have to play a new one. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because you have only 3 of these in your deck.
yeah.
So you'd want to have it at a ratio where when you draw this primal energy, which would be like, so what would the odds for that be? I mean, you sure could calculate something that by turn 5, you'd probably have drawn one of these. So you would want enough energy scrolls in your deck that you draw maybe 1 or 2 of them by turn 5. So you don't get too many dead scrolls in your hand. Because that's the thing with these scrolls. If you don't play them, any other resource scrolls in your hand is a dead card.
Is a dead card, yep, exactly. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's pretty cool. I like that because it plays into a strategy that you would already be running in growth, and it would give you some synergy between 2 different factions, and it isn't a permanent thing as well, right? Like it again, like the others, it isn't going to last forever. So
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
And
there
again,
is some way around it.
There are counters to it. Anti-lingering tools.
Anti-lingering, exactly. Yep, anti-lingering would be a great way to shut this down. It would almost kill this deck, almost, right? Like if you realized that they were doing it and they were like, oh, okay, well, I got Rattle Him in my deck, like let's throw a Rattle Him. I actually get to make use of this counter-lingering spell, which is not really that useful right now.
Yeah. And I would like, in general,
cool.
for lingering scrolls to be kind of part of the standard deck. Just as you have spells and enchantments and creatures in your deck, you'd have lingering spells and anti-lingering spells.
So this is lingering spells are actually somewhere where I can have a bit of say in this, is because I actually play quite a fair bit of the Pokemon TCG, and in the Pokemon TCG they have something similar to lingering. It's different mechanically, but it's a similar concept, and that's stadiums, right? You play a stadium and it has an augmented effect for both sides,
I've heard about that.
for both players. Yeah, the difference there is that there can only be one in effect at a time. So a good counter to stadiums is stadiums, right? Which is a great way to encourage people to run stadiums, is to make it so that they're a counterplay to themselves. I'm not sure if that will work for scrolls, but that's it's something to think about, right? But I totally agree with you. Spells, the fact that they're not a mainstay in decks or even really considered in decks right now. Halls of Master is by far the most powerful out of all the lingering spells. I think everyone would agree with that. Even post nerf, which is not here yet, but when it is, I think that it will still be the most powerful, at least in my opinion, right? Because it can lead to some ridiculous combos and language chains and all sorts of fun stuff, which I absolutely love, and I hate the fact they're changing it, but whatever. And I totally agree with you. It should be more common, and I think just making strong lingering spells should be a really important and key thing for the devs heading into the next set, is making lingering spells a bit more mainstay. The better they get, the better the removal and counterplay for lingering gets, which is important.
Definitely.
So,
yeah. But yeah, I mean, this set is my kind of argument for the developers to strengthen a lot of these aspects of the game that just aren't strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these aren't really that radical things. I haven't really introduced any new mechanics so far in this thing, aside from the transformation bit. and the multi-resource thing. But everything else is just, standard things in the game that just need these buffs through synergies. Healing, it needs to have, more versatility. It needs to be useful when you're behind as well as ahead of your opponent. Lingering need to be more valuable in general and just be easier to play and sustain. And, creatures, while being more powerful, should also have counterplay. The same with enchantments. So,
Yeah,
yeah, these
it's
are
right on the money.
the growth ones. Do you have any additional thoughts on them as a whole?
No, I definitely think there's some really cool ideas in here, and I think I by far my favorite out of all of these is the druid that turns into the bear. I can't remember. It's druid of the earth. That was it. That turns into the bear. I
Yeah, that
really
one.
like that mechanic, and I think that's a really interesting thing. And I think if there's anything I mean, God forbid the devs look at this, but if there's anything, any one thing that I think is a takeaway from this is that that as a trigger and that as a concept is really cool. I really would like to see that in the game. I think it would add a lot to the game, and I don't think it would be even that hard to add. Really, I think it would just be a cool thing.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm willing actually to continue describing the other sets. I mean, the other part of the set, if you're up for
Hmm.
it.
Um. See, it's a hard one for me because it's one, it is late, and two, because I was casting tonight, I skipped dinner, so I haven't actually had anything to
Oh,
eat
that is
yet.
fine. I'm actually, I'm actually pretty
Yeah,
tired myself.
yeah,
Ah,
I definitely want to go through the rest of these. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and unfortunately, I don't have a very good platform to talk about this kind of stuff.
yeah,
So like
streaming can be
this is
awkward sometimes.
yeah, it really can be, and when I do stream normally, especially for me in particular, it's casting. It's always casting, and it always probably will be. Is the main thing I do. Why I say I cast for different people and on different games. Because that's what I enjoy most. Obviously, and I'm not saying I don't enjoy it. So it's cool to have these kind of exercises where you talk about the game and you talk about mechanics of the game in a more what if scenario.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's good because you kind of get to just brainstorm these
yeah,
ideas that, this is probably what Mojang does when they try to figure out, the direction for the game to take.
yep,
But they're only
yep.
4 or 5 people. That's a problem. If they can get all these brainstorming ideas that thousands in the community, or hundreds in the community would offer, it might, help them point them towards a direction that they haven't considered.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, if I am to talk about, so because I don't get to talk about this a lot, but if I am to talk about the overall, what my opinion is right now of Mojang as a company, I think that the biggest thing holding them back, by far, the absolute biggest thing holding them back is the fact that they don't have enough people working on the game.
Yeah,
They don't have enough people working on the game, which means that they can't do these cool ideas and stuff that me and to you, I obviously can't speak for you, but in my opinion, for me and for you and for everyone else, like, why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done this? Why haven't they utilized the test server is a big one for me. These things, it's purely down to low manpower and not having enough people working on the game. And I know there's nothing we can really do about that. And that's really, really upsetting and really, really sad. My only hope is that stuff like this, where we have you, Squiddy, coming up with new sets, and there's a lot of other people do similar things where they come up with new ideas,
yeah,
new
I'm looking
sets.
forward to seeing, I think, Billy's and Color Plants fan-made sets.
Mm. And they can they because of that they can take those ideas, and I think I mean, I don't know about you, but I would imagine that you would be happy to see these in the game,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like
definitely.
if they were like Squiddy, we're gonna put these in the game, I hope you're okay with this, you'd be like, yeah, sure, do it. I mean, like, that's the whole reason I made them. um
Because that's the thing.
and
I mean, the developers have stated that with the contest, they're not actually looking at game balance and meta when they selected the scrolls. And that is fine. But what the players can offer that the developers can't really is ideas based on the playing in the meta. Because I don't think the developers play as much as the players, the game. So they're not as in the know when it comes to what might be causing these factional imbalances or these
Mhm. Mhm.
mechanical awkwardnesses in the game. So this is really just a representation of what I, as a player, feel is missing in the game. It's not necessarily
Yep.
what I want to see in the game, but it's stuff like this that I love to see in the game.
Mhm. Yeah, and the cool thing is that anyone can do this, right? Like anyone can be like, oh man, this is a cool idea. They jot it down, go to there's plenty of tools out there to make scrolls, and then they can show it to the devs on Reddit or whatever it may be in design competition. I think that's really cool, and hopefully they'll take more of these ideas from the community. Um, and it doesn't just have to be scrolls. Something that I want to saying that you saying that got me thinking is the fact that it doesn't have to be scrolls, right? Scrolls is the most direct way of doing things, and I think it's also the
Yeah.
most beneficial. But beyond that, it can be ideas for the game. I can't tell you how many ideas that I have sent to Gareth, or that me and Gareth have talked about. There's many a times where me and Gareth will get on Skype and we'll discuss different ideas. We've talked about having calendars built into the game to show events and when certain matches will be taking place. We've talked about having deck challenges that change every week, and if you win 10 games, you get to pick like 5 or 6 cards from that deck to keep, and then you can eventually unlock the entire deck over the course of a week. Like all these different ideas and stuff, they're also really beneficial. I think really beneficial. And they're a different way that if maybe you're like me and you're not as good at the game, and so perhaps your understanding of the game, or especially for me, my understanding of the game is not that good, right? Like I don't always know what's going to be good in the game. I don't always know what's going to be weak, what's going to be strong, what's going to be healthy for the game, etc., etc. I can still add to the game and give my
Yes.
thoughts
I
and
mean,
opinions to the game.
anyone can really add to it because, especially if you're a casual player, your input is even more valuable because you are representing this player base that should be the majority of the
Yes, yes,
scrollers in the game. Because the problem right
absolutely.
now is that we basically have at Vega, it's about 70% veterans in the community that are actively
Hmm.
contributing, and maybe just a small minority of casuals and new players are contributing. So these ideas that I've come up with, they might not be what the game needs because I'm not a casual player. I'm not a new player. These are things that I, as a more experienced player, think should be in the game, but it might not be the right direction.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. I mean, like this is the thing with me as well. It's like I've been playing so long. Like I want stuff that like I want Mangonel Speed Focus to be a thing again. Like, but new players don't even know what that is, and they don't even know why it's good or why it's unbalanced and stuff like that. So like my opinion is a bit is not the one that they should just be listening to, because even though I'm not a top player, I'm definitely someone that's played the game for a long time and I've been very involved in the competitive scene. So my opinion of the game is very different to the average Joe's player. And if you're out there, I mean, there are people listening to this right now that I don't recognize. Like, you're the guys that can pick this up and come up with really cool ideas. And Mojang do listen. They do absolutely listen. They
I
might be a
mean,
bit
that is,
slow, but that's just because of
the
a
thing
small
is, I
team.
think that the whole Mojang isn't listening thing is just plain wrong. They are listening, they just don't have the time to implement all these
They can't
things.
do anything.
I mean,
They
I
can't
mean,
do
I
anything.
suggested taxing as a trait, and that was implemented in the game. And that
Damn
is,
you to
I
hell.
mean, it's a pretty big thing when you think about it. A
Yeah.
community member coming up with a alternative kind of scroll mechanic that doesn't previously existed in scroll, that hasn't
Hmm.
existed in any other TCG, and that was added
Hmm.
to the game. And they've added, I think, mulligan after the players wanted in the game. They added what else have they added?
If we're talking things outside of just mechanics of the game, spectate was added
Yeah,
because there was a competitive scene. There was a competitive scene for scrolls that wanted to grow, wanted to get to get bigger, um, and they
I
added
mean,
that
spectating
because
helps a
of
lot when it comes to these sort of tournament and more competitive sort of events. It's a lot easier than kind of get into it. I couldn't imagine what it was like before spectating
I didn't.
was a
Yeah, I
thing.
wasn't part of it. Because I couldn't be part of it. The only people that used to do tournament streams back then, pre-spectate, were players, and they were the good players because they're the people that went all the way. Because you couldn't watch the matches after you lost. So if you didn't get to the final, then the tournament might end in like
Yeah,
20 minutes. A game of scrolls. So I mean, it wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Mojang listening and hearing people say, "Hey, we want spectate," and then them adding it to the game. Like I wouldn't stick around. Like
yeah.
the
I
reason I
mean,
stuck
now
around is because I could be
you
involved.
have Pansy streaming ESL tournaments, and he doesn't. I mean, sure, he's gone up to the very top sometimes, but normally he doesn't go to the finals.
Yeah,
But he
yeah,
can still provide his sort of uh, ideas, his sort of commentary to the game, adding it and his perspective, and I think that really helps the game, and it helps kind of foster this community. And it's a this is just one example of something that Mojang has added after community feedback that has really helped the game.
Yep. Yeah, I
But,
definitely agree.
but yeah, I think with that, we can probably call it an end here to the stream. So I'd like to thank you for coming on here and giving your feedback, your perspective on these scrolls I came up with, and basically my thoughts and my ideas on what the game needs.
Yep, sure.
And for you guys who are listening, thank you for watching. Do you have any plugs, Billy? Last minute here.
Changes to BraggingBrawl probably happening after the reception we got at the very end there. It seems like people want to keep the guild connotation.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let me just add this. I think there is room for team tournaments. I don't think the BraggingBrawl should be turned into a slightly more general team tournament. I think it should be kept as a guild tournament.
Yes, this is the opinion that everyone seemed to have. So yes, we will keep the guild connotations with it. We'll probably drop the player base and maybe allow multiple teams to enter from the same guild.
That one I hate absolutely.
You actually hate that one?
Yes, because here's the thing that's going to happen. Badger Guild's going to send in 2 teams.
Yes,
and they are filled with top players, and then we're going to have a Badger versus Badger final. And I don't think anyone would like that.
This is why I kind of want to drop the guild connotations, because then at least it could be different teams getting to the finals. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it could be...
Yeah, but then you'd be just Badger players in those... Like, the thing is, the Badger players have a lot of great players. It's fine for them to win tournaments and things like that. Yeah. But it's more fun to see these guilds duke it out, and occasionally you get a really close win, someone finally ousting the king from the top throne.
Yeah.
So I think definitely smaller teams, great idea. 3-man teams, I think it's going to be a lot easier for smaller guilds to
enter.
Send in.
That one's going through. I'm going to really campaign.
You're not going to have as many issues with missing players because you'd probably take the 3 most dedicated players. And you could always have a thing, submit 5 players, and 3 of them will be playing.
I also think it might make the Badgers less powerful, right?
Yeah.
And hear me out on this one, is because in a guild to have 5 players up to the caliber of the Badgers, like any of the Badger players, is quite difficult. To have 3 up to the caliber of the Badger players, more doable, right? Like
It's a lot easier.
Yeah, you could pit 3 French Spirit players versus 3 Badger players, and I think the matchup would be even closer than it is now. Like, I don't know. I think that one's gonna go through definitely.
But
people want to keep the guild connotations, and they don't want multiple guilds apparently.
Definitely start small. You take one step at a time.
Next month, and we might even do. It depends, but we might try to get every Saturday of that month and do something new every Saturday, and then the following month after that, stick with that and go with that.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
So we'll see. I might even do it next coming up. Oh no, there's a tournament this coming up Saturday. I'm pretty sure. I think.
Oh yeah, it's Guido's. It used to be called the Pirate Cup, but it's called now the Umlaza Cup.
Yes, because
But definitely give it a go. Personally, I love the triple elimination Danger Zone tournament that I created, and the format for that.
I feel like I'm ripping that off.
But I think you should go with 3-man teams. Maybe even try the double deck requirement, because that makes it easier for casters to put up like deck lists.
Yeah.
If you submit that. But that might be going a step too far.
As long as people are happy with BraggingBrawl, like here's the thing: I'm not the person that is in charge in BraggingBrawl. I'm just the guy that for the last 6 months has been running it. So I don't want to be the guy that drives everyone away from BraggingBrawl, makes people not enjoy BraggingBrawl. Like whatever you guys, the people that participate in it want from BraggingBrawl, I will deliver on it. If you guys think it's absolutely okay how it is now, then I am clearly wrong, and I will go with you guys, and we'll keep it the way it is, and we'll keep it like that until there is a problem. I just feel that right now, BraggingBrawl has issues where we don't start on time, and that's a big problem for me because not many people can, be there for 6 hours, and so I think teams need to be reduced. I also want to see more people participate in the BraggingBrawl. Maybe reduced teams will be the fix for that. Or maybe we'll have to extend it a bit more. I don't know, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. All that matters is what you guys want. So if you guys are happy with it how it is, then we'll stick it how it is. If you guys want to try some new stuff, we'll try some new stuff.
All right. With that, I
So
think
yeah,
I will end the stream then. So
okay,
thank you for coming on once again. Thank you
no,
guys
no
for
trouble.
watching. Check out the Purple Pansy stream because I assume that's what you're going to plug. Check out
Oh yes,
the
yeah.
Brag and Brawl things that are going to pop up on Reddit. Let Billy know what you want for the Brag and Brawl. And you guys, subscribe. I can't subscribe. Wait, follow me. Check out my YouTube and just have a good day and a good week. Bye bye.
Bye.